Dave Sharma, even considering the Yom Kippur War, has Israel ever seen anything like this?
No, I don't think so. I mean, this is the biggest loss of life from a single incident in Israel, and certainly of civilian life, as far as I'm aware, in its history. Previous conflicts, the Yom Kippur War, the Six-Day War in 1967, happened on Israel's borders. They were fought by the military. The civilian population, whilst terrified and scared, was largely untouched by those conflicts. Hamas's terrorist raid reached deep into Israeli civilian centres. They occupied towns and villages and communities. They went door to door, executing parents in front of children, executing children in front of parents, abducting young mothers, their children, elderly, defiling bodies, sexual assault. I mean,
it's barbaric. It's barbaric. I mean, as I said, Dave, I mean, humanity here is on the rack in the view of the whole world. I mean, now Netanyahu, understandably, even though I have to say, by the way, Netanyahu's promised vengeance. I was going to ask you, what does that mean? But why would Penny Wong call for restraint from Israel?
I found that entirely perplexing. And bear in mind, she called for restraint on Saturday evening Australian time, Saturday lunchtime in Israel, when Hamas was still running rampage through the south of Israel, when they were still holding hostages, when they were still in control of communities, when people's lives were literally hanging in the balance. I think any person would expect the sovereign government to do all that it could to secure its citizens and rescue its citizens at that time. I mean, I think calling for restraint is this sort of diplomatic doublespeak that people wheel out on any occasion, but it needs to be anchored to the reality of the facts on the ground.
Netanyahu has promised vengeance, and understandably, and I think legitimately. But what will that mean, Dave Sharma? You've seen that scene on the ground. Where will it lead?
Well, if the Israeli military has a free hand, and I need to caveat that because there's a lot of hostages in Gaza that are being held by Hamas that will complicate this, but in terms of a military objective alone, that would mean the complete annihilation of Hamas, the capture or killing of all of its military leadership, the abolition of its military infrastructure, and I would say the reoccupation of Gaza. The Israeli military has been out of Gaza since 2005. I think that's the only way this war ends.
Can I interrupt you there? That being said, and if that looks like happening because of this vengeance that Netanyahu is arguing he is going to implement, at what point then does Iran and Hezbollah come in at the other end, at the southern end, and force Israel to fight on two fronts?
Well, that is a very real possibility. If Hamas looks like it's close to being destroyed, it may well be that Hezbollah, under Iranian direction, seeks to open another front on the Lebanon border in the north, or that Hamas-affiliated cells and other terrorist groups like Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the West Bank across Israel's eastern border do the same. This could get very complicated. And indeed, we could see a situation where Israel and Iran are exchanging blows directly, which would mean we're very much in a regional conflict.
Has it been a mistake for Israel to tolerate a terrorist outfit like Hamas subjugating the people of Gaza when the Hamas Charter of 1988 calls for Islam to obliterate Israel? I mean, why, given that it's a terrorist outfit, an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, often described as the world's incubator of modern Islamic terrorism, I can't, people like us, lay people miles away, don't understand how Hamas still survives.
Well, I think that's certainly a question that's being asked in Israel now and will be asked. I think, from an analytical point of view, Israel has not up until now been prepared to pay the price that would be required to destroy Hamas entirely. So they've contented themselves in years past with what Israeli generals call mowing the lawn, cutting the grass, which means you wind back Hamas's capabilities, you set them back a few years, you destroy their infrastructure, but they'll come back again in a few years' time. I don't think anyone in Israel thinks they can now return to that status quo, but the question you ask is the right one. Should they have ever been prepared to allow it to reach this point?
See, I mean, back in 2003, President George Bush said, quote, "The free world, those who love freedom and peace, must deal harshly with Hamas," and that, quote, "Hamas must be dismantled." Now, Hamas is still here. That was 2003. I mean, Barack Obama said the same sort of stuff. I mean, what will be the fate of Israeli citizens and soldiers who've been taken hostage? What do you think? Are they gone forever?
I hope not, but I fear so. I think, look, Hamas will use these hostages as political propaganda to put leverage on Israel, which they're already seeking to do, and ultimately as human shields as well around.
Yeah, they've promised to execute them publicly. That's what they said. They made a statement.
Yes.
They'd execute them.
Exactly. I mean, this is the Islamic State we're dealing with, or actors like Islamic State, which we all remember well from its barbarism a few years ago. This should remind us that this isn't some sort of national liberation movement, sort of post-colonial overtones. This is a barbaric terrorist movement. And the events and images of the weekend should have made that abundantly clear to everyone. And why the protesters in Sydney last night have not seen this themselves is beyond me.